You were taught that royalty meant beauty, power, and elegance. But what if I told you behind those gilded crowns lurked deformity, disease, and unspeakable suffering? Imagine being born into a family where your father is also your uncle, where your bloodline twists into itself, until your body becomes a prison of inherited decay. This is their story. Across Europe's courts, kings and queens believed blood was sacred. They locked themselves into cousin marriages, terrified of tainting their lineage with outsiders. But purity had a price. It bred deformity, madness, and tragedy. And nowhere did this curse strike more viciously than within the Spanish Habsburgs, a dynasty rotting from the inside. History isn't dead. It's just buried beneath silence. Like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're ready to keep digging with us. But be warned, some truths bite back. The curse of blue blood royalty wasn't about love. It was about blood. Every marriage was a calculation. A bargain to keep the crown heavy on the right head. Cousins wed cousins, uncles married nieces, and women were passed across branches of the same gnarled tree. To the world, these unions looked like divine order. In truth, they were a slow-motion execution. The Spanish Habsburgs perfected this ritual of decay. Their family tree was not a tree at all, it was a knot. A tangled loop where the same names reappeared generation after generation. And from that knot emerged women born to rule but instead condemned to suffer. Doctors and courtiers praised their noble features, but behind the portraits was something grotesque. The infamous Habsburg jaw, a jawline so oversized it warped faces into caricatures, lips jutted forward, tongues swelled so large that speech became slurred, and chewing became a chore. Even silence became heavy, filled with the sound of labored breathing. But the torment did not stop at the face. Inside their bodies, wombs turned hostile, pregnancies ended in blood-soaked bedsheets, infants born still, or babies who lived just long enough to prove the dynasty could not escape its curse. And then there was Joanna of Castile, Joanna the Mad. Her name echoes like a warning across centuries. She was a daughter of this twisted blood, and her mind carried the weight of its collapse. When her beloved husband died, she refused to let him go. Night after night she wandered the halls with his corpse, stroking his face, whispering into his rotting ear. Was it grief? Was it madness? Or was it the silent inheritance of a family that had bred itself into delirium? Her story should have been a signal, a blaring alarm that this obsession with pure blood was killing the very people meant to guard it, but no one stopped. The church blessed these unions, kings enforced them, and the women, trapped in this gilded cycle, bore the consequences alone. Every royal birth was hailed as a triumph of destiny. But for the mothers, it was a coin toss with death. Each baby carried the dynasty's hopes and the curse of its blood, and sometimes the dice came up cruel, condemning these women not to reign, but to slowly wither under the weight of history's most poisonous family tree. The queen who couldn't escape her own blood, Mariana of Spain, was born into a dynasty already cracking under the weight of its own blood. By the time she arrived in 1606, her family tree had folded back on itself so many times that she had fewer unique ancestors than a common farmer. For the Habsburgs, this was considered strength. For Mariana, it was a life sentence. From the moment she could walk, people noticed her features. The jaw, that heavy, protruding lower lip, so exaggerated it gave her face an unnatural slope. Her portraits softened, it painted by artists instructed to flatter, to veil reality in brushstrokes of grace. But reality was less merciful. Eating was slow, chewing was painful, conversation required effort, her words shaped by a mouth that no longer obeyed. Yet her beauty or lack of it did not matter. She was royal, and royalty had a single duty: to marry and to produce heirs. Mariana was sent to Vienna, where she became the wife of her uncle, Emperor Ferdinand III. She was only 15. Her body was still fragile, her mind barely matured, and yet she was placed in the cold embrace of a man who was both husband and family twice over. Her pregnancies began almost immediately, and so did her losses. Stillbirth after stillbirth, infant coffins lined in velvet, whispered prayers in candlelit chapels. Each child she buried was a reminder that her womb, like her blood, was no longer reliable. Yet the blame never rested on the dynasty that had twisted her DNA into failure. It rested on her shoulders. She was a queen. Her worth was measured in heirs, and she was failing. Still, Maria Anna clung to faith. She became known as the most Catholic queen. Every misfortune was met with prayer, every grief offered up as a sacrifice to God. Her piety was admired, even celebrated, but it was also tragic. For the same church that raised her up as holy had blessed Thecus in marriages that condemned her. Her life was a cruel paradox. To the world, she was a pious queen, noble and serene. Behind palace doors, she was a woman, unraveling, her body breaking down, her spirit chained by duty she could never fulfill. Maria Anna would live into her 30s, long enough to see the Habsburgs' decline written into her own failures as a mother. She never escaped the burden of her blood. And yet, her story was not the end, it was only the prelude to something darker. Because another Habsburg woman would soon take her place, and her suffering would foreshadow the dynasty's grotesque collapse. The last Habsburg woman, Maria Theresa of Spain, was born in 1638, into a world that already whispered of curses. She carried within her veins the tangled loops of generations, cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, bloodlines pressed together until they could barely breathe. From birth, she bore the quiet signature of decay. Her body was frail, her speech slow. Courtiers described her as gentle, even sweet, but behind their words lingered pity. Some hinted she was simple-minded, a child trapped in a woman's frame. Others whispered she was sickly, not fit to rule, a shadow of what a queen should be. And yet, as with every Habsburg daughter, her fate was never her own. She was married to Louis XIV of France, the Sun King himself, in one of the grandest unions of the century. For Maria Theresa it was not a love match, it was a transaction. France and Spain would share power through her body. Her womb was a treaty, her children the currency of empires. At Versailles, Maria Theresa stood beside a man whose brilliance seemed to outshine the world. Louis, bathed in gold, surrounded by mistresses and adored by courtiers. She, by contrast, appeared almost invisible. Her speech was often mocked. Her awkward gait made her look clumsy in a court obsessed with elegance. Rumors spread that she was slow, dim, or simply broken, but none dared speak the true word. Inbred still, she did her duty. She bore 6 children. 5 died before reaching adulthood. Only one son survived, fragile and pale, carrying the same genetic weakness that had claimed his siblings. Every loss hollowed Maria Theresa further. Her body, already weak, grew weaker. Her faith deepened, and she retreated into prayer, as if begging God to undo the sins of her ancestors. Louis treated her with cold tolerance. He flaunted his mistresses before her eyes and humiliated her with affairs that everyone knew about. She wept in private, endured in silence, and when courtiers spoke of her, they called her devout, but dull. Maria Theresa's life ended as it had begun, quietly tragic, overshadowed by the weight of a dynasty's mistakes. She was never the brilliant queen, never the radiant wife. She was the price of centuries of incessant offering placed on the altar of power. And yet, her story was not the darkest. While Maria Theresa faded in silence, another Habsburg woman would become the grotesque bride of Spain itself, her life entangled with the dynasty's most monstrous heir. The grotesque bride of Spain, Mariana of Austria, was born into a bloodline already too twisted to sustain itself. She was the daughter of Ferdinand III and Maria Anna of Spain, both heavy with Habsburg ancestry. By the time she came into the world, the family tree had collapsed into itself like a snake devouring its tail. At just 14, Mariana was married off to her uncle, King Philip IV of Spain. Imagine the horror. A girl not yet grown, sent to share a bed with a man twice her age who was also her blood. This was not unusual in her family, it was expected. The dynasty demanded it. The portraits of Mariana show her pale and rigid, her mouth small and pinched and her body stiff in heavy gowns. But paint lies. In truth, she was frail and frequently ill, her body weak even before it was forced into the endless cycle of pregnancy. Her purpose was singular, to give Spain an heir. She endured pregnancy after pregnancy. The palace grew familiar with the sounds of mourning, tiny coffins carried out under torchlight, whispered prayers offered for infants who never breathed more than a few days. Mariana gave birth to 4 children. 3 died before reaching adulthood. Each loss carved her down, but the dynasty did not care about her grief. They demanded she try again. Her one surviving child was Charles II of Spain. He was sickly, deformed, and grotesquely unfit to rule. His jaw jutted forward, his tongue swollen for speech. He could not chew, could not walk without help, and could not father children. He was the dynasty's last heir, the living embodiment of its centuries-long obsession with blood purity. And yet the blame always circled back to Mariana, to the court. She was not a victim of her family's obsession, but of its failure. They whispered that she was cursed, that her prayers were empty, and that she had brought ruin to Spain. But how could she escape? Her marriage was not a choice. Her womb was not her own. Her life had been shaped by decisions made centuries before. She was born as her son struggled. Mariana herself grew brittle, both in body and spirit. She looked like a queen carved from wax, stiff, lifeless, trapped in duty, and all around her, Spain crumbled. The empire was losing its grip on power, even as its queen sat in silence, bearing the unbearable. Mariana's legacy was not one of triumph, but of decay, for she had given Spain an heir. But the heir himself was a monster born of its poisoned blood, and it would be Charles II, her fragile, broken child, who revealed the true horror of this dynasty's obsession with itself. The last scream of royal blood, the Spanish Habsburg dynasty, ended not with glory, but with a whimper, a single broken man whose body carried the weight of centuries of incest. His name was Charles II, son of Mariana of Austria, remembered by history as El Hechizado, the bewitched, but there was nothing supernatural about him. Charles was not cursed by sorcery, he was cursed by his own blood. His very existence was the grotesque bill come due for a dynasty that had folded in on itself for generation after generation. From the moment of his birth in 1661, it was clear something was wrong. His head was oversized, his jaw grotesquely deformed. The infamous Habsburg jaw jutted so far forward that he could barely close his mouth. His tongue was swollen, slurring his speech into sounds few could understand. Eating was nearly impossible. Chewing was agony. His body was weak. He struggled to walk. He was prone to seizures, illnesses, and endless fevers. Courtiers whispered that he was more corpse than king, a boy whose body had betrayed him before he even reached manhood. Yet he was crowned, paraded through Madrid, and held up as a symbol of Spain's divine right to rule. Behind the processions, though the truth was undeniable, the empire's future rested on a man who could barely survive his own childhood. And then came the cruelest twist. Charles was infertile. Despite being married twice, first to Marie Louise of Orleans, then to Maria Anna of Neuburg, he never produced an heir. His wives lived like widows in gilded cages, trapped in a marriage to a man they pitied more than loved. They tended him, mourned him while he was still alive, and endured the humiliation of a kingdom waiting for children who would never come. In Charles, the centuries-long gamble of pure blood reached its endgame. The Habsburg obsession with keeping power within the family had destroyed the very thing it sought to preserve. His reign was a tragedy, his body a living autopsy of what happens when human beings ignore nature's warning signs. When Charles died in 1700, childless and broken at just 38 years old, Spain's once mighty dynasty collapsed with him. His death triggered the War of Spanish Succession, a Europe-wide struggle to claim the pieces of an empire that had rotted from within. But for the women of his bloodline, the story was even darker. For centuries, queens like Joanna, Maria, Anna Maria Theresa, and Mariana had been sacrificed at the altar of power. Their bodies became battlefields where politics and genetics collided. Their suffering was dismissed as divine fate, their deaths as necessary costs. Yet in truth, they were not chosen by God. They were condemned by men who believed crowns were worth more than daughters, who chose purity over survival, who fed their own women to the jaws of history's cruelest experiment. The Spanish Habsburgs vanished, but their portraits remained, women painted in silks and jewels, their faces serene, their bodies cloaked in dignity. But behind the brushstrokes lies another story, a legacy of blood, madness, and decay, a dynasty that believed itself eternal, undone by the very blood it worshipped. Dark history isn't just about the dead. It's about what still lingers in shadows. Like, share, and subscribe if you're ready to remember what the world chose to forget.